Good morning and welcome to the Grim. I'm your host, Kristen. On today's episode, we'll be opening the gate and entering Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, located in Sleepy Hollow, New York. So grab your favorite mug, cozy up, and let's take a dig into history. As the legend goes, in a churchyard in the small town of Sleepy Hollow, each crisp autumn night, a Hessian trooper arises from his grave in search for his missing head. Decapitated by a cannonball during the Revolutionary War, he seeks those unfortunate souls in his path's head, just in case they might be his own. The only saving grace is if you find yourself in his path is to race to the wooden crossing bridge where he is barred from crossing to safety. For hundreds of years, the legend of Sleepy Hollow, taken from other European legends of similar fates, is retold each autumn season. Fans of Washington Irving's story every Halloween head to the town of Tarrytown in New York, where they can now find Sleepy Hollow. First known as North Tarrytown, the quaint suburb in New York saw its renaming in 1996 to reconnect with its legendary tale. The cemetery where the famous short story takes place might not truly have a headless Hessian trooper on the prowl for his head each evening, yet the beautiful grounds and famous interred residents make it a show-stopping visit. Oddly, Sleepy Hollow Cemetery isn't the quaint cemetery we all think it is from the storybook legend. Comprised of 90 acres of land established in 1849, with around 45,000 souls laid to rest, it's quite massive. If its acreage isn't quite impressive, its residents should be. Washington Irving, who penned the Headless Horseman's tale, is one of its famous interred. Irving was an American short story writer who wrote Rip Van Winkle, historical biographies, and history on 15th century Spain. He was born and raised in Manhattan but temporarily moved to England in 1815 for family business. After publishing his first works in 1802, he continuously published works for the rest of his life. Just 8 months prior to his death, he completed a 5-volume biography on George Washington at the age of 76. What made Irving such a different American writer in his time was he was the first to find acclaim in Europe. During his time living abroad in England, Irving published the Sketchbook of Geoffrey Cranon. It was a collection of short stories, and two were the Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle that would become his most famous works. After returning to America, he penned the novel A History of New York from the Beginning of the World to the End of the Dutch Dynasty by Dietrich Knickerbocker, his first major novel. Prior to its publication, he began a hoax using the New York Evening Post, seeking information on Dietrich Knickerbocker. Readers became intrigued, and its popularity even led to the New York City officials offering a reward for any information on Knickerbocker. When he finally published the novel, it quickly became a bestseller. New York residents also took to the name, and it became a nickname for Manhattan residents, eventually leading to the New York Knickerbockers basketball team adopting the name. Irving's stories did something many others didn't. They featured towns or settings from America, often retelling European folktales in a new fashion. His fame and admiration from other European writers also helped encourage other American writers, such as Nathaniel Hawthorne, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Herman Melville, and even Edgar Allan Poe. Ironically, Poe thought he should be given credit for being an innovative writer, but lacked sophistication. Washington Irving passed away on November 28th in 1859, but his legend of Sleepy Hollow lives on in infamy and is a favorite among many during Halloween. Unknown to many by her real name, Elizabeth N. Graham is a famous resident of Sleepy Hollow. While Graham's fame is from an entirely different era than Irving's, she's quite important. Many know the Canadian-American businesswoman as Elizabeth Arden, the founder of Elizabeth Arden Incorporated Cosmetic Empire in America. Born on a farm in Canada, Elizabeth's family did something a little odd in the 1870s, where they immigrated back to England, where many were fleeing from it, due to a rich aunt willing to assist her and her siblings by paying for their education. Elizabeth would eventually drop out of nursing school to become a bookkeeper for her elder brother in Manhattan at E.R. Squibb, a pharmaceutical company, which would forever change her life. She then would spend hours in their lab learning about skincare and working as a beauty culturalist or treatment girl for Elder Adair, setting the foundations for her own company. To save money on a salon sign, she just used her first name Elizabeth and then took the name Arden from a nearby farm, thus bringing Elizabeth Arden into existence in 1910. 2 years later, she then traveled to France to further her knowledge in beauty. Upon returning to America, she had a collection of rouges and tinted powders that she had created herself. She then sought to expand her empire further, opening salons across the world. Elizabeth's brand would be responsible for changing how society and women perceived makeup, transforming it from its original tawdry associations with the lower class and the women of the night. It then became necessary for a ladylike image of a proper and appropriate woman. Yet she didn't stop there. Her salons would not only sell products but taught women how to apply and which products to purchase. She would pioneer the concepts of color theory in makeup, scientific formulas of cosmetics, beauty makeovers, and stress the harmony of colors. She was awarded by the French government in 1962 the Légion d'honneur to her contributions in and to the cosmetic industry. Elizabeth was also interested in horse racing, owning her own stable, Main Chance Farm, that did very well for itself, with stake winners, one being the 1947 Kentucky Derby winner Jet Pilot. It's her transformation of cosmetics for women that became the industry we see today that really marks her place in history. Elizabeth passed away on October 18 in 1966. She is buried in the Grand Plot in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. It's no wonder that due to Sleepy Hollow's close location to New York City, that some of its high society might find its way there into the cemetery. Prominent, at one time one of the most wealthy families in America, two of the Astors can be found within. Brooke and Vincent Astor are permanent residents and sadly the last of the Astor family. Vincent was the eldest son of John Jacob Astor IV. His father was thought to be the richest man in the world at one time and also one of the most prominent American passengers aboard the RMS Titanic, where Vincent's father met his grim fate going down with the ship. This then, of course, led to Vincent inheriting the entire Aston fortune. Vincent would go on and be involved in similar interests like his father, belonging to the New York Society of Colonial Wars and joining the U.S. Naval Reserve. He, however, is more remembered for his philanthropy, which, inheriting a massive fortune at the age of 20, you'd assume Vincent would be a spoiled and careless child with his money, but he wasn't at all. He decided that with his father's passing, to drop out of Harvard University and change his family's image. Instead of being the aloof, miserable slum landlord, he sold any shady businesses and invested in reputable ones. He then also took time to help others less fortunate, as well as building playgrounds and better housing. Vincent was also a member of the U.S. Naval Reserve and did serve during World War I. He was assigned to help guard the bridges and aqueducts of New York City. Then again, being called up in World War II, he served with the rank of commander and was given assignment as the area controller for New York. Prior to the war in 1938, Vincent went on a secret civilian mission for President Roosevelt, sailing his personal yacht, the Yormaha, to Japan. He helped gather intelligence around the Marshall Islands about the Japanese naval operations, eventually handing over his yacht in 1940 to help the Coast Guard to help guard America. The ship is sadly no longer in existence after it was decommissioned in 1946, then sold for scrap in 1964. Although not illustrious naval career, Vincent helped provide information on the USSR account balances throughout the war. This was due to his own access into Chase Bank and reporting weekly updates to the U.S. Treasury from the beginning of the war till at least 1945. He was also the one to suggest in 1942 to equip fishing boats with radios to report U-boat sightings. Yet Vincent's personal life wasn't one of fairy tales. On the day of his wedding in 1914 to his first wife, he had taken ill with the mumps that would leave him sterile. Perhaps a sign it wasn't meant to be, they divorced in 1940. He then went on in the same year to marry his second wife, but then again headed to divorce in 1953. Oddly, though, before agreeing to divorce, his only conditions for his second wife was to find a replacement. Perhaps the third time's a charm, he married Roberta Brooke Russell, whom he would remain married to for the rest of his life and who is buried with him within Sleepy Hollow. He and Brooke established the Vincent Astor Foundation that was created to help give back to New York City. On February 3rd, 1959, Vincent passed away from a heart attack. He then left his entire fortune to the Vincent Astor Foundation and his wife, Brooke. She carried on with this philanthropic work till her death in 2007 when she passed away at 105 years old. Another resident of Sleepy Hollow that you might not know by name but who affects your everyday life is Leo Backlund. Backlund was the father of the plastics industry and the inventor of the Velox photographic paper in 1893 and Bakelite in 1907. Bakelite is a versatile plastic that is non-flammable and inexpensive. His creation marked the beginning of the modern plastics industry as we know it today. Backlund's story is also one for the American storybooks, being born in Belgium to the son of a cobbler and a housemaid. He would then go on to study chemistry and acquiring a PhD magna cum laude from the Gate University at just the age of 21. Then he and his wife went on a travel scholarship in 1889 and would travel to England, then America, where he would meet Professor Charles F. Chandler of Columbia University and Richard Anthony of the E&H.T. Anthony Photographic Company. Chandler, during their meeting, convinced Backlund to come permanently to the United States to work for Anthony. After working for Anthony for a few years, the scientists decided to part ways. This was then when he developed Velox photographic paper, which he then sold to a man named George Eastman for a sum of $1 million. Eastman's name might not sound familiar to many, but his company, the Eastman Kodak Company, should be. Backlund's paper would forever change photography and bring into existence camera film as we know it today, and Kodak film. Then came Backlund's discovery of bakelite. Bakelite was based on a chemical combination of fentanyl and formaldehyde, two compounds that were derived from coal tar and wood alcohol in his era. His discovery would change the world, replacing shellac and hard rubber parts in the electric power industry at first. Then in the 1920s, it was used for knobs, dials, circuitry panels, cabinets for radios, and electrical systems of automobiles. After a few years in the 1930s, bakelite made its way into fashion, being used for costume jewelry and other novelties. Backlund's bakelite was used everywhere in various fashions, and he of course patented his discovery, and then he founded the General Bakelite Company in 1910. He would then go on to serve as the president of the American Chemical Society in 1924 and won various awards for bakelite. In his later years, Backlund grew eccentric and had family disagreements with his son over the heir's salary. In 1939, after hundreds of patents and historical breakthroughs in science, he sold the General Bakelite Company to Union Carbide from the advice of his son. He then sadly became a recluse and passed away on February 23, 1944. During the rise of the Second Industrial Revolution, the promised land of America saw many attempting to make better lives, uprooting their lives from Europe and starting anew. Many rags to riches stories exist, but in the realm of legendary stories, one rightfully near the top is Andrew Carnegie, who also happens to be interred within Sleepy Hollow. Carnegie's life and contribution to history isn't just a stuffy rich shirt, but more along the lines of the American dream. Originally born and raised in Scotland, his family didn't move to the States till he was around 12. His upbringing in Scotland was what truly shaped Carnegie for his success in America. His uncle, who was more like a surrogate father to him than his own living father, was Scottish political leader George Lauder Sr. He introduced him to historical Scottish heroes such as Robert the Bruce, William Wallace, and Rob Roy, all while giving him parental guidance. He also lended the Carnegie family money to help them move to America, hoping for a better life, which was young Andrew's turning point turned fortune. This was during the times when Scotland was in starvation, and America was held as the promised land for opportunity, food, and a new life. Many families like Carnegie's were struggling to make ends meet. Going where they believed work was plentiful, they ended up in Allegheny, Pennsylvania in 1848. Andrew and his father, struggling, took jobs at the Anchor Cotton Mills, a Scottish-owned facility. This is where Carnegie's first job was a bobbin boy, changing spools of thread in a cotton mill 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, for $1.20 per week. Soon, he captured the attention of John Hay, a Scottish manufacturer of bobbins, who offered him a job for $2 per week, but the work was even worse. He was employed to run a small steam engine and to fire the boiler in the cellar of a bobbin factory. Yet it was his next job that really started to change Carnegie's luck. He became a telegraph messenger boy for the Pittsburgh office of the Ohio Telegraph Company due to a recommendation from his uncle. Using the job, he built connections meeting many of Pittsburgh's businessmen. He was promoted within a year to operator and saw others' doors opening also. Befriending Colonel James Anderson, he was given the use of his personal library of over 400 volumes every Saturday night. This helped Carney become the self-made man in both his economic development and intellectual, and then also cultural. This experience was imprinted on Carnegie and made him forever grateful to the Colonel Anderson, and he was quoted saying, "Resolved, if ever wealth came to me, to see to it, that other poor boys might receive opportunities similar to those which we were indebted to the nobleman." He then went to work for Pennsylvania Railroad, where Carnegie would see his fortunes change even more. He started as a secretary telegraph operator at a salary of $4 per week and built his way up from there. By 1859, he was just 24 years old and became the superintendent of the Western Division. He then, during the Civil War, became the superintendent of the military railways and the Union's government telegraph lines in the East. He helped open new rail lines into Washington, D.C. After the war, he then decided to leave the railway business and move on to the ironworks and founded the Keystone Bridge Company and built his first steel plant. He would go on to create a steel empire, controlling most of the extensive integrated iron and steel operations ever owned by an individual in the United States. Carnegie also purchased at a low cost the most valuable of the iron ore fields around Lake Superior, setting himself up for more success even later on. He also invested in other businesses during the years, such as Columbia Oil Company, where they would help build his wealth beyond his steel empire. During his business adventures, he started giving back to the community, constructing swimming pools for the people of his hometown in Dunfermline, Scotland in 1879. In the following year, Carnegie gave £8,000 for the establishment of the Dunfermline Carnegie Library in Scotland. In 1884, he gave $50,000 to Bellevue Hospital Medical College, now part of the New York University Medical Center, to create a historical laboratory, now called the Carnegie Laboratory. He established libraries all over the world, aid for spelling reform, and other numerous causes. It's absolutely pointless for me to attempt to sum up Andrew Carnegie's life's accomplishments, donations, and work. The list goes on, and it's worth digging into on your own if you have time. His legacy, built off hard work and being a shrewd businessman, made him just as legendary as the cemetery he resides in. Andrew Carnegie passed away on August 11th in 1919 in Lenox, Massachusetts, at his Shadowbrook estate of Rockville, Pneumonia. At the time of his passing, he had been estimated to give away $350 million, roughly almost $6 billion today. After his death, an astounding $30 million he left over was given to foundations, charities, and pensioners. When you've got the Astors and the Andrew Carnegie, it's got to be hard to top these prominent families in a cemetery, right? For Sleepy Hollow, it's not. Residing also within is William Rockefeller Jr., co-founder of the Standard Oil Company, with his brother John Davison Rockefeller and one of the richest men in America at one time. Rockefeller Jr. had an interesting start to life, being the middle child of a large family, and his father was a con artist. Yet, in the era of the self-made man, he and his older brother were definitely not short on ambition. He first started as a clerk for a miller in Cleveland, Ohio, and then joined his brother's produce commissions business, and then everything took off. Being very adept in business matters, he took charge of the company's export business. Eventually, the company would become the Standard Oil Company. Being the son of a con man, Rockefeller Jr. had a few schemes up his sleeve. In 1899, he and another principal from the Standard Oil Company and the Endicott Copper Company founder, Marcus Daly, formed the Amalgamated Copper Mining Company. Their intent was to control the copper industry and devise a get-rich-quick scheme for $39 million. You see, the Amalgamated Copper Mining Company was nothing but a paper company, complete with dummy directors that were in fact their own clerks from the Standard Oil Company. Using the bank system against itself, they first purchased the Endicott properties from Daly for $39 million for themselves, with a check that was to be deposited to the bank and remain there for some time due to them being friends with the bank owners. They then went on to claim their paper company was worth $75 million, using a certain amount for a good reason. They were then able to borrow $39 million from the bank using the Acclimated Copper Company as collateral, due to the company's worth being so high, and then quickly bought the Endicott Copper Company as the Acclimated Copper Company, inflating the price as the company themselves. But how could they pay back Valley with just a paper company not truly worth $75 million? Ingeniously, they then sold $75 million worth of stock in the Acclimated Copper Company to the public. The scheme made them a total profit of $36 million in cash. In 1912, due to the large profits, Rockefeller Jr. was investigated by the committee for allegedly earning $30 million in profit through cornering the copper market and synchronizing with artificially enforced activity in the Acclimated Copper stock in the New York Stock Exchange. Yet he wasn't the only businessman to create such schemes and cornering the market. Due to other individuals like J.P. Morgan, George F. Baker, and James Stillman, the committee known as the Peugeot Committee opened the public's eyes to such schemes. Of course, because there were no laws actually broken, they couldn't do a thing about their past actions. But the findings did inspire the public to support to ratify the 16th Amendment in 1913 that authorized federal income tax, a passage of the Federal Reserve Act, and to add the Clayton Antitrust Act in 1914, preventing such schemes. William Rockefeller Jr. passed away on June 24th in 1922 due to a cold he caught on a road trip with his brother John and nephew John Jr. in New York. His estate left to his descendants was a gross total of $102 million. The Rockefellers obviously left their mark on New York City with not only schemes but opulent wealth that will be remembered by all. Lasting legacy seems to be a common occurrence of Sleepy Hollow residents, but do any linger within as ghosts? Beside the Headless Horseman, Sleepy Hollow also has the legend of the Bronze Lady. Within the grounds is a mausoleum for Civil War General Samuel Thomas, whom also amassed a great fortune from coal and the railroads after the war. Yet when he passed in 1903, his widow Anne thought her late husband needed more than a mausoleum to mark his plot in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. Seeking out a top sculptor of her time, she commissioned Andrew O'Connor Jr. to create a masterpiece for her husband's grave. Creating a larger-than-life bronze woman seated across from his mausoleum, the sculpture was gigantic. But Anne hated his creation, saying it was too depressing and she was hoping for something happier. O'Connor Jr. then recreated a happier head for the Bronze Lady and showed his latest work to the widow, who now loved the second version, but full of arrogance, he took the redesigned head and smashed it to the floor, telling Anne he would never add it to his sculpture. True to his word, he never did. Years later, when Anne was finally buried with her husband, O'Connor's original work was on display for all mourners to see. Perhaps this led to the Bronze Lady legends, several in existence. One claims that if you climb onto her lap, then jump down and spin around 3 times, then look at her, you'll be cursed forever. The second is that if you hop into her lap and then attempt to peek into the mausoleum, you'll see a ghost within. The final tale is that if you touch her face, you invite a curse, or if you insult her, you risk bad luck. Many seeking the Headless Horseman on his midnight run might be disappointed by the elusive ghost of Sleepy Hollow, learning he's just a figment of Irving's imagination. That doesn't stop the visitors each autumn from making the journey to Sleepy Hollow, and I don't blame them. The graves of John Dustin Archibald, Viola Allen, Don Barber, Thomas Fear, Henry E. Bliss, Holbrook Blinn, Alice Brady, Edward Major Bowes, Walter Chrysler, Francis Pharcellus Church, Henry Helmsley, and even more prominent figures can be found within Sleepy Hollow that are filled with tales themselves. A town known for its headless Hessian horsemen certainly has so much more to offer. And if you do find yourself face to face with the Headless Horseman, remember to race across the bridge, or you might be haunting Sleepy Hollow Cemetery next. The grave guide for Sleepy Hollow Cemetery was a pumpkin spice latte from Coffee Labs Roasters Incorporated, complete with an adorable pumpkin foam art for the fall festivities. For now, we're closing the gate on Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. We hope you enjoyed our dig into history. If you did, leave us a review wherever we're haunting your podcast queue, or subscribe today to join us next time when we open the gate on the Grin.